Please welcome Managing Director ANZ Amazon Web Services, Paul Migliorini, to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is, in fact, it's remarkable to see so many people here. Unbelievable. This time last year, we had around 120 execs come and join us at our summit. This year, it's nearly 600. So we sincerely appreciate the time you're all making to be with us here, and also hope that you get a great quality return on the investment of time you're making. We think you will. As you may have noticed this year, we've redesigned the Executive Forum to be a two-day event. And our hope and our vision with the Executive Forum is that what you can gain is perhaps some insights from other leaders through plenaries like this one. We hope that you can learn from each other through roundtable sessions and get hands-on in the workshops. But as you can see in the space outside, we were also hoping that there's plenty of opportunity for you guys to network with each other. And if you need to, take some quiet time to work. And given the size and scale of it this year, we are really thankful to both SAP and Accenture for sponsoring and making this event possible. So I'd really appreciate it if you'd join me in giving them a round of applause. So I think that most of you this morning have come from our Innovation Day. And Innovation Day last year was something of an experiment. And the reason we put it on was because we had a lot of customers coming to us and saying, look, we really like the technology. The building blocks you give us are really helpful. But we're also interested in understanding more of the how of innovation. You see many successful case studies around the world. People often ask us about Amazon's approach to innovation, things like skills and culture and leadership. So we experimented last year with Innovation Day. It was really popular, and we put it on again today. I think it's still popular. I hope you enjoyed it. We had nearly 8,000 people join us this morning. A couple of takeaways for me that I really enjoyed. It's always great to have senior tenured Amazon leaders out. Neil Lindsay was, I think, fantastic. He today is the head of marketing in Prime, reports directly to Jeff Bezos, and I loved his talk track around getting to yes and challenging ourselves to create magical customer experiences. I also loved the Qantas story. I think Rob James and Ellen Joyce did an awesome job. Loads of great anecdotes there, and obviously we're immensely proud to have worked with Qantas now for over 5 years in what I think is one of the best tech-led business transformations we've seen in this country easily over the last few years. And what was apparent to me listening to Ellen Joyce speak, equally apparent last year listening to Anthony Pratt speak, is that this isn't just about technology. This is very much a business transformation. And here in Australia, we've seen the technology landscape change radically over the last 5 years or so, perhaps even more. We're seeing these large multi-year monolithic technology projects rapidly become a thing of the past, and it's speed, I think, rather than scale that will determine success going forward. So I think that our teams are now looking to us to help them with the skills and the roadmap to build a future-ready business. Now, it's really clear that there's no single answer to that question. There's a series of very different perspectives. So we thought in order to kick off the Executive Forum, we'd share with you some of those perspectives from leaders in different areas, both here and around the world, in the hope that coming out of this plenary, you have a series of things that you want to go and investigate more deeply, that you can then take back to your businesses. There's the perspective of incredible Asian and Australian enterprises doing great things here and around the world. There's a perspective of global leaders like Netflix, like the Coca-Cola company. There's also this perspective, I think, of great Australian visionary leaders. And we're really privileged today to have Paul Bassett join us. Many of you will know Paul as one of the founders of Seek. But also more recently, Paul's had great experience on the board of Wesfarmers and leading one of Australia's top tier VCs, Square Peg Capital. And the last perspective that I think is really interesting is the role of Australia's leading academic institutions and how we as industry can collaborate in working with these great minds to bring new innovations to bear. So as I said, we're going to start at a fairly high level in the hope that it gives you a bunch of markers, a bunch of ideas, which you can then build your agenda around over the next 2 days. So first up, we have Ed Lenta, who leads our Asia-Pac business. Please welcome Ed.
Good afternoon, and thanks for your time today. It's fantastic for me to have the opportunity to chat to you a little bit about my experiences working with customers around the world, and then more specifically here in Asia Pacific. Before having the distinct privilege of running our Asia Pacific business, I got the chance to work with the world's largest multinationals. I was out of our Seattle office, and I ran a business for Amazon Web Services called Global Accounts. And my only job was to travel around, spend time with large multinationals, and let them figure out how they could release their businesses from the technical debt that sat inside them, and how they could accelerate the pace of innovation, how they could think differently about the customer experience. And hopefully, I can share some of those ideas and some of those learnings with you and show you how companies here in Asia Pacific and here in Australia have been successful in doing exactly that. And let's start with an idea. Let's start with this idea that the data is in, that people have decided, the research has shown over the last 4 or 5 years that successful technology organizations are organizations that embrace agile practices, are organizations that form small teams and work on service-oriented architectures, and are organizations that move really, really quickly, but more importantly, successful companies, companies that drive innovation more quickly in their business, companies that experience greater competitive advantage, increase their company's value, and increase their share in the marketplace, are those organizations that have successful technology organizations. That research has been done. And so the question then becomes, what are the patterns that we see inside of those companies as they unleash the power, the efficacy of those technology organizations? And what I've seen in the interactions with many, many customers, especially in the enterprise in my almost 8 years now as part of the Amazon Web Services team, is that there are patterns. There are specific things we look for success, and I would go so far as to say, as regards the ability for technology to influence the speed at which you can build new businesses or new products, create new competitive advantage for your own company, each one of these things is actually a prerequisite. We need, from the customers that we work with, a bold vision. You would have heard today from people like Alan Joyce, a bold vision where customers are saying, not that we will think about new projects, but we will think about new market opportunities. We will build new businesses. We will build new service lines. We will build new forms and sources of revenue, and we will go and transform the way in which our company looks today. And then once we've established that vision, we need the executive champion. We need the champion who understands, first of all, the role that technology plays in implementing and reaching that bold vision, and then who is able to put their career on the line to achieve it. Again, you look at Alan today, I think back 5 years ago. I remember when Suncorp's CIO and at the time Chief Operating Officer stood up in front of thousands of people at reInvent, our user conference, and I remind you this was 5 years ago, and boldly said, we are moving 100% to Amazon Web Services before they had even moved their first workload. A bold vision, and somebody who understands that technology needs to be built into every component of the new products and services that they will be building. We also see this incredible force of re-engineering the people inside an organization, of bringing back the capabilities into your organization, and in some case, unstitching the outsourcing decisions that were made in the past. How do we reintroduce builders into our organization? And when we do reintroduce builders into our organization, how do we make sure that those builders are developers and that they're organized in small teams? And they've built those teams in such a way that they're iterative, that they take risks, that they're willing to fail, and that they move forward based on compelling customer feedback at all times. And then finally, how do we make sure that they do adopt agile practices? Where we see these conditions, we see the most amazing things happen for our customers. As an example, think about Grab. Grab is now the largest, the most successful ride-hailing company in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is 11% of the world's population. It is an enormous market opportunity. And Grab was able to see off an enormous competitive threat from a very, very large incumbent global player in the space by virtue of the fact that they thought locally, they built local teams, and they empowered those local teams and organized them in such a way that they were free to build for the local customer experience. They gave them platforms that they could move quickly on, and they had a bold vision. Anthony, the CEO there, very, very quickly started thinking about market adjacencies. It wasn't just ride-hailing anymore. It was Grab Pay, and it was Grab Food, and if you can believe it, most recently Grab Pet. Well, they will collect your pet from one part of the city and take it to another part of the city. They're always looking for new market opportunities and always looking to reinvent themselves, to the extent now that they are the local provider of ride-hailing right across Southeast Asia. In DBS, again, a bold vision, a move to move away from the constraints of outsourcing and to rethink the workforce, to bring builders back into the company, and then finally to rethink the customer experience, to build completely new channels to the customers so that their customers will be able to interact with their bank, according to DBS leadership, as if it wasn't even a bank. That moment of transaction, that moment of requirement for a financial institution will be almost invisible to them. And as part of this, they're completely retooling their entire digital customer channel in the public cloud. Or I'd invite you to think about the National Australia Bank, who was so vocal last year at our summit here in Sydney about the fact that they are insourcing and have today insourced over 540 jobs back into the bank. And where they've done this with the bold leadership vision of their CEO, who said that the National Australia Bank will reinvent itself based on their data, and that they will use machine learning and advanced analytics to change the customer experience. So when they bring skills back into the bank, and by the way, they've trained over 4,000 people now and certified thousands of people in various technology capabilities. When they bring these people back into the bank, they will organize them into these small teams, and they will optimize for the developer experience, because they know that that's what's going to affect them, allow them to build new products and capabilities. Or Korean Air, who just a few months ago announced the end of a 40-year outsourcing agreement with a large incumbent outsourcer and partnered with Amazon Web Services to move all of their applications to the public cloud. Why did they do that? They did that so that they could recognize that that was now undifferentiated heavy lifting. Those were the investments of the past. They could now run those down over time in a much more efficient way, and they could reskill their people to focus on what matters, to focus on using digital technologies to reinvent the customer experience, and they're quickly starting to do that. Or right here in Australia, Rio Tinto, who thought, oh, my apologies, in India, Bajaj Finserv, one of the top 10 companies in India, and certainly one of the largest financial services providers. They provide credit facilities, they provide insurance, they provide wealth management capabilities to millions of people in India every single day, but they had traditional routes to market. They had service agents right across India, and so with a bold executive vision, they created a completely new company. They created BFS Direct, and BFS Direct's mandate was to go directly to customers only through digital channels and sell them insurance, and sell them credit-based services, and sell them services around wealth management, but to use machine learning, to use analytics, to use all sorts of digital capabilities to affect that customer experience, and to think about the potential wealth of each individual customer, the risk associated with lending them money, and just to transform the underlying business model of BFS Direct, but ultimately of Bajaj Finserv. And then finally, Rio Tinto, one of the largest companies here in Australia, who are rethinking both the mining, the mine of the future, but also the supply chains on how they get the materials that they mine to the markets that they need to serve. Rio Tinto are using capabilities like IoT, edge computing, machine learning, and analytics to take data not just from mines, but then to marry that data up with systems of record, with data stores right throughout their organization, and then to democratize access to that data through all sorts of capabilities which give rapid insights to the people inside of Rio Tinto so that they can take action. We see trucks here because there was a specific capability that they built where the trucks were able to register the roughness of the road. And in registering the roughness of the road, they could send out other vehicles to remediate that and save hundreds of thousands of dollars per truck in just the cost of replacing the tires. So you can look for inspiration wherever you turn, and there are companies right across Asia Pacific. There are companies right here in Australia that are doing the most amazing things. The other thing, though, in addition to the four essential ingredients for that we find with our customers, is it needs to be done on a modern architecture. It needs to be done on a fundamentally different technology architecture, and that, I hope, will be Amazon Web Services. I know that the team at Amazon Web Services very, very much values the partnership we have with all of you, and we look forward to continuing to work with all of you to do equally inspiring things inside your businesses and to create all sorts of new opportunity. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our next speaker, who's going to talk about innovation here in Australia. Please welcome Paul Bassett from SquarePeg.
Good job. Thanks, Adrian. Good afternoon. So I guess there's a really simple message that I want to communicate, and that is that I think Australian companies are underinvesting in their future growth. And all of us bring particular experiences and perspectives and biases to bear. And my perspectives come from being, as Paul mentioned, as a founder of Seek with Andrew and Matt back in 1997. Today, my job is as a venture capitalist, meeting world-class entrepreneurs here in Australia, Southeast Asia and Israel, and trying to back the next generation of startups. But also, the big company experience I bring to bear is having the privilege of serving on the board of Wesfarmers for 6 years until last year. And the topic that I'm most passionate about is how Australia becomes a more innovative economy, and the absolute need and imperative for us to do so. If we look at the 2,500 largest spenders on R&D globally, 14 of those companies are Australian. Only 14 out of 2,500 of the largest spenders globally are Australian companies. Telstra is the largest at 199 on the list. Those 14 companies combined spend about a fifth of what the largest R&D spender globally spends, which is Samsung, about 1.5% on average of Samsung spend. That's our largest 14 spenders of an R&D. We then look at expenditure by businesses today on R&D in Australia. It is low relative to our peers. It's declining. We've seen a slow, steady uptick in the leading 5 players in the OECD, approaching 3% of GDP. We've seen Australian expenditure by businesses on R&D actually decline over the last 5 or 6 years, and it's at a really, really low level. Now, this paints a picture of insufficient expenditure in R&D. I think the reality, and we'll talk about in a moment, is actually a lot worse than what the picture appears. Let's talk a little bit about a previous era of disruption. If we go back a generation or two, and we think about how our most successful companies in Australia, our national champions, our iconic brands, became successful companies. And every company, of course, started life as a startup. And if you think about the dominant brands in Australia, they're typically companies that operate primarily locally and have very, very strong market share within the Australian market. And they disrupted an earlier era of companies. So, for example, we think about retail. Companies like Woolworths and Myers disrupted the corner clothing store or the corner supermarket. They took advantage of their superior size and scale, buying power, distribution capabilities to build strong national positions and become dominant players within their markets. The same story in financial institutions, for example, with our big four banks. So that was the basis. That was the basis on which the prosperity of this country was built. Today, problems are being solved globally, not locally, and increasingly they're being solved by software-driven businesses. Now, not every problem is being solved globally, not every problem is being solved by software-driven business models, but a huge proportion of the biggest problems today are being solved globally, not locally, and by software-driven business models. And those two factors are very much related. If you think about these software-driven business models, there's two things about them that really, really stand out. One is they have an enormous technology spend that then the benefit of scale, of scaling that spend across a global client base rather than a local client base, the advantage that brings. But the other thing about the internet era is distribution costs are zero. You combine those two things together, it means that global will beat local in many cases. And so, for example, we listen to music on Spotify. There isn't an Australian streaming service that we listen to. We book accommodation, we book our holiday on Airbnb. AWS provides us with our cloud services. And of course, we've produced a good number of our own local champions, but we need to produce a lot more. And the reality is for our companies that have become the best in Australia at what they do, they are at risk of being disrupted unless they become the best in the world at what they do. And we're going to see that in market after market. And so our economy, which is built on national champions, is more at risk of disruption than many other economies. I said we don't spend a lot on R&D and that spend is declining. But if you accept the proposition that many of the problems in the world today are being solved by software-driven business models, and given that 5 of the 10 largest companies in the world are technology companies, businesses based on competitive advantage in technology and in software, if you accept that proposition, then our picture in terms of R&D is actually a lot worse than what it appears on the face of it. Because if you isolate Australia's R&D, our business R&D spend, focus on ICT as a specific sector, we are one of the worst in the OECD. We are at about 5 or 6 or 7% of what they spend in Israel. On ICT R&D, we're about 85, 90% less than what's spent in the US. We're a laggard in terms of expenditure R&D in ICT industries. And so we've got a range of factors that mean that we are very, very vulnerable in an era of technology disruption. The low level of R&D spend, the fact that many of our most successful companies are national leaders in a world increasingly of global rather than local winners, the fact that investors in Australia, and I hear this over and over again from leadership groups, executive teams in Australian businesses, from boards of Australian companies, that investors in Australia are increasingly focused on profitability rather than long-term growth and investing in that growth. The number of times I've heard from non-executive directors or senior executives of Australian companies bemoaning the fact that companies like Amazon are rewarded for focusing on growth, and their company is punished for focusing on growth, it means that our corporate leaders need to do a better job of articulating why we need to invest in growth. And the last factor is we don't have enough technology executives in Australia with a seat at the table. If you look around our boardrooms, we have a relatively small number of people who have world-class technology backgrounds sitting on those boards. Many of our CIOs and CTOs don't really have a seat at the table. In a lot of cases, they're reporting to CFOs or other people in the organisation rather than sitting to CEOs. So there are a number of factors that are creating underlying challenges for us. But of course, we've got some amazing exceptions. We have built some world-class global leaders in a whole range of different areas, companies going back a little way like Cochlear and RedMed, and more recently companies like Canva and Airwallex. We can build global winners. Today Atlassian is bigger than Telstra, an extraordinary Australian success story here in Sydney. We're now investing more in venture capital than we were previously. Venture capital funds in Australia were raising a couple of $100 million a year just a few years ago. Now they're raising over $1 billion a year. The reason why that's particularly important is venture capital is a lead indicator. These funds are raising money, investing in the next generation of Australian startups, and hopefully a number of those will emerge as global winners in their chosen markets. So there are some positive signs. But the overall message that I want to leave people in the room with is today we have a slow burning platform. It is a burning platform that is masked by 28 years of consecutive economic growth. It is completely understandable in that context that we are complacent, but we have a burning platform. And most particularly, our companies that are dominant players in the Australian economy are the ones that are most vulnerable. We have the raw ingredients in Australia to be a global leader in innovation. We have an extraordinary education system. We have unbelievably talented employees. Wherever you go in the world, not just in Australia, you meet Australians having leadership positions. Amazon is a fantastic case in point. We have a great regulatory environment. We have lots and lots of capital. We have the raw ingredients. But the question is whether we have the mindset. The future of your company and the future of the Australian economy depends upon whether we're prepared to invest in our future. I'd now like to introduce Adrian Cockcroft, Vice President of AWS. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Cheers. Okay, so I'm going to talk about speeding up innovation, but I want to give you a bit of context here. I'm going to give you a 15-minute version of my talk now, and then tomorrow there's an hour and a quarter where I'm going over basically the same story, but in much more detail for about an hour. Then I'll be joined by Rob Smedley of Formula One, who for about 15 minutes of Q&A with both of us, okay? I've got Formula One on here because of some work we're doing. I'll get to that right at the end. I'll explain what we're doing with Formula One with AWS. But I think the thing that I'm hearing from customers all around the world is that they need to speed up and get their innovation engines working better. So I'm going to go through a structure which talks about the things that I see blocking the path to innovation and the three stages that I see people going through. Let's start off with what's driving that innovation. If we look at the way IT has been working like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you were building IT to handle some number of employees, maybe your factories and supply chain. Sales channels were mostly indirect physical outlets. Think of a bank branch or a shop. You send something in a box to the shop. You hope you never see it again because that would be it broke and you have a return. So returns are bad. And marketing was based on TV and print advertising. So that's the old world. We built IT to cope with that scale and what we needed to do to manage those things. In the new world, we're building mobile apps for specific employees to automate parts of their work. Our factories and supply chain are now incredibly detailed sources of information, which we're instrumenting in great detail. Sales and delivery are now online, so now instead of shipping something to a shop, you now know every customer you've ever sold to, and you have to mine that data and make sense of it. Everything you've ever made, if you're manufacturing things now, instead of putting in a box and hoping you never see it again, once it's installed, it's up and running and it's talking to you via IoT. And if you don't hear from it every 5 minutes, it's a problem. So now we have to build IT that scales with the number of things you've ever made, right? Rather than the number of sales outlets that you're supplying through. And marketing is now online, so if somebody says something bad about you on social media, you have minutes to respond before it gets out of control, right? We've seen a number of those cases. So it's, everything is now real time. Everything is now scaled with the number of customers and the number of things you've ever made, rather than the number of sales outlets and the number of employees you have. So this is what I think of as the digital transformation. This is my sort of summary of why this is happening, and it's because we now have the technology that lets us connect directly to our customers. That means that we now have to learn how to personalize it, because now we know who our customers are. I mean, I spent 7 years at Netflix. I spent the first years building personalization systems for trying to, and the big advantage Netflix had over the cable TV channels, they actually know who watches what. And they don't have to just put it on TV at 9 p.m. on a Thursday and hope that they figure out from Nielsen how many people watched it to figure out how much to charge for the ads. That's the old model for TV. The new model, I know how to find everybody that's going to watch this new show. Netflix could make hits out of things that the cable companies could not monetize. So that comes from customer analytics and managing these new channels that go direct to the consumer. And fundamentally, from an IT point of view, you've got many more things to manage. They're at vastly larger scale. And you can't just say, I'm just going to release a new thing every 6 months and have that work. The customers expect that you are upgrading what you're doing every day. Continuous improvement. It's annoying, but every time I pick up my phone, it's updating apps, right? I get a new app update every week, right? But online web services, there's many updates a day in many cases. And if your business is still set up in a mode where your IT department delivers every 3 months or 6 months, you're not going to keep up. So what AWS has been doing, what I've been working on, is unblocking these innovations for digital transformation with a lot of enterprise customers. And what I saw was a series of patterns. Didn't matter what kind of customer it was, but pretty much all the enterprise customers had the same set of problems. So these are the 4 areas. I'll just go through pretty quickly. Let's just get through. So leadership systems and feedback. You have to get away from centralized, slow decision-making. You've got to build a high-trust organization, and you've got to have flexible policies and processes. Otherwise, you're just going to be sitting there trying to figure out why you can't innovate. A couple of good books here, both by AWS employees, but Stephen Orban, Ahead in the Clouds, all the best practices for how to make a cloud transition work. And then Mark Schwartz, who was CIO at Department of Homeland Security Immigration Service in the US until a few years ago, he built this book called A Seat at the Table. It's How to Be an Agile CIO. He looked at all the best practices of how to be a CIO, and it was all waterfall. So if you're agile, it's different. And he's got a new book coming called War and Peace in IT, which actually I think it comes out this week or next week. It's about, if you're not the CIO, you're somebody else in the business, about how to use IT for competitive advantage. It's the other side. The 2 books go together. A really entertaining writer as well. You'll enjoy reading those books. They're quite amusing. You should look up his videos as well. He's a great presenter. Then, if we look at training, compensation, I mean, you have to train the people you've got on cloud technology. That's the pattern I see that works. That you're hearing that, you heard it earlier. It's what NAB are doing. It's what Capital One did. It's what most of the successful companies, they take their existing sales force and just train them up. But once you've trained them, you've got these Pathfinder teams figuring it out, how do you keep people, right? If you train somebody up, they're now worth more in the market. That employee commands a higher value in the market. So if they leave because you didn't pay them anymore or whatever, so you've got to figure out how are you going to retain people that you've trained. You give them some stock, give them various ways of doing it, maybe a little bonus or a pay rise or something. Or maybe you just use some kind of gamification and have a big sort of ceremony where you make them feel good, right? But if you don't think about that, you're just training it for all of the people around you that will steal those people because they are worth more and you'll have to hire them back for more money. So you should make sense of getting that right. This is a great book. It was mentioned, Paddy McCord was mentioned by Dom from Atlassian in the talk this morning. This is an amazing book. Almost every company where I've given this book to HR, their heads explode. I mean, it's a totally radical and disruptive way of thinking about how to run a business. And if you're a smallish startup, you can do it. If you're a big company, you can't copy this stuff. But it's worth understanding why Netflix is such a different company in the way it thinks. If you look at organization, we're moving from projects to product teams. Even if you outsource everything to a service provider, you still want to outsource to have them be doing continuous delivery, continuous improvement, and long-term product ownership. You don't want to have things packaged into a project with a deliverable, and then they walk away, and then you're locked into whatever was given, whatever was delivered. Those long delivery, big projects are a problem. You want to use DevOps, you want to run what you wrote. This reduces tech debt and lock-in, because if you're continuously developing something, you're continuously able to refactor your dependencies and change the decisions you've got and design out the different things as you want to. So you're not frozen in time, and that's when you're locked, right? If you've got no development team on a project, you're locked in. If the development team's still iterating on it and making it better, you're not nearly as locked in as you were before. A couple more good books of the DevOps Handbook, and then this good book called Project to Product, which came out last year by Mick Kirsten. So I say, tomorrow I'll go into these in a lot more detail. And then let's look at sort of the risk and finance. I've seen this a few times. You're moving capitalized data center to expense cloud. Maybe you capitalize development and expensed operations. If you combine it into DevOps, you have to come up with new mechanisms to figure that out. You have to plan ahead. Don't surprise the CFO or your shareholders. Now, what's the role of boards in the long-term success of the company? These are the concerns of boards. They basically manage risk. They're managing compensation policy, executive succession, all these things. But this affects your ability to innovate and build long-term value. And a lot of the best practices in boards actually reduce innovation because they focus on short-term concerns. But what they're saying is, please be more innovative like these companies. And these companies do not follow those best practices. They think about it in a very different way. So here's what happens. You get a short-term focus on compensation policy. Rewarding somebody for the stock price being up this month is probably the most extreme form of it. You get executive succession, where it's okay to be non-technical, and quite often these leading companies are founder-led. They're more able to take risks as well. Capitalization issues, limited investment. We've got risk-adverse, and I don't want any failures. Right? That doesn't work. But we still want you to be more strategic and more innovative. So, even though we're not giving you any of the basis that will support that. So if we look at these successful patterns here, what does that look like? Fewer higher paid staff and more ownership, right? More shares, but just only a larger proportion where the employees own more of the company. Including technical competence in executive succession. You wouldn't hire an executive that didn't understand how to read a balance sheet, regardless of whether in finance or not. Like, you have to have basic understandings of sales, marketing, finance, all these things, but it's okay sometimes to hire people who have no understanding about technology. I don't think that works today. You want to manage the expectations and invest in differentiators from a finance point of view. Smaller projects with incremental returns is really key, and time to value is how you measure that. And that lets you get out of the way of innovation, right? So this is the patterns I see that work. So these best practices get in the way, right? You have to figure out how to break through it. So this is the pathway. These are the 3 steps I see. First thing is learn to do stuff fast, learn to do simple things quickly. Then get to scale, to distribute, optimize capacity, and then the strategic work, which is like data center replacement. The fundamental metric for innovation is time to value. If you do some work, how long is it before that brings value to a customer? Is it months? Is it days? And for some companies, it's now minutes, right? From check-in to deploy. That's it. Because there's no economy of scale in software. Smaller changes are better. And the best IT architecture today is actually minimalist, messy, inconsistent, has guardrails for the things that matter, but doesn't over-constrain the way you get things done in between. And the best architecture is designed to evolve rapidly and explore new technologies. That's very different to the sort of more traditional IT architecture where you try to get your best practices and tidy it up and make something that's clean and nice looking and it's going to be stable for a few years. You're just going to be permanently behind the curve if you try to do that. And you want to do low latency continuous delivery. This is basically cloud-native applications for those large-scale new things that you're building, those greenfield applications, cost-optimized, high utilization, and a cloud-native architecture. So you want to pay-as-you-go, self-service, globally distributed, using the cloud for availability models, extremely high utilization. This is how you get extremely high cost efficiency versus a data center. You should be running at many times higher average utilization in the cloud by turning off anything that gets remotely idle. And then finally, strategic workloads. Data center to cloud migrations are happening now for some of the most strategic workloads and safety critical workloads in travel, finance, healthcare, manufacturing. You heard about Korean Air moving everything to the cloud. We've got major manufacturing deals with people like Volkswagen going on right now. As data centers move to cloud, those manual disaster recovery processes are being standardized and automated, and we're building systems where instead of having that annual experience where they're trying to figure out whether that failover disaster recovery plan works, it's continuously tested resilience. You can be sure that things are going to work, and if anything happens, then you know what to do about it. So that's what I had, and I've just got 1 more minute to talk about Formula One. Another one of the examples that we have as a customer going all in on AWS over a multi-year transition is Formula One, the organization that owns the sport. This is not the individual teams, this is the sport. And they are moving from data center to cloud, and we're also moving their technology at the racetrack, and we're adding AI. We have a whole bunch of things we're working on, a series of projects we're working on. But there's a thing about Formula One. 500 million fans watch it on TV every year. We were looking for an advertising vehicle, particularly aimed at the European market, where this is a very strong brand. And since it's amongst the most watched sports in the world, what now happens, if you're watching Formula One, you'll see an AWS logo on screen 16 times every race. Right? That's the deal. And it has a logo, and it's something about insights by AWS, and it tells you what's going to happen in the pit stops and who's going to overtake, what the tire strategy is, a whole bunch of things like that. So tomorrow you'll be hearing from Rob Smedley about the technology of Formula One, and it's an incredibly data-rich sport. These cars, the instrumentation on these cars is increasing exponentially. It's being loaded up, and it's being fed to huge data science and data analytics things. But from an enterprise point of view, it's this continuous improvement in an extremely competitive setting. You have to be perfect every week if you're going to win every race. And then 2 weeks later, there's another race. Your car has to be better that week. You can't, if you stay still, you'll go backwards. The difference between the best and the worst car is less than 4%, right? So you just get 0.25% off, and you're now in 3rd place instead of winning the race. So highly critical stuff, and building winning teams, talent strategy, there's a lot of things we can talk about here. Anyway, just want to wrap up now. So hopefully I'll see some of you tomorrow afternoon, and we can have some more discussions with Rob and enjoy the discussion that Rob will be giving you tomorrow morning. So thanks very much. And I'm going to hand over now to Professor Alex Subik from Swinburne University. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I will be sharing some insights with you today about the Swinburne and Amazon Cloud Innovation Center that we are about to launch for Australia, the first cloud innovation center in the Southern Hemisphere. Both of organizations are very excited about this development, in particular also because of its unique focus. The Swinburne Amazon Cloud Innovation Center we've titled Data for Social Good. I'd like to put that in context. The last 4.5 years, I've been actively working on the Prime Minister's Industry 4.0 task force, in particular focusing on the advanced manufacturing sector and transformation of the advanced manufacturing sector through digitalization. At the moment, I'm responsible for rolling out the national network of Industry 4.0 test labs in all the states, which possibly will consolidate more than 200 companies, clustering around each of them. What we've learned the last 4 or 5 years is that the technology part is actually quite clear. The social part is the difficult bit. And in the end, it really is not about technology, it is about society. It is about how we enable and support societal transformation through technology, through digitalization. In previous 3 industrial revolutions, we have seen major parts of society left behind, and technology got ahead of us. We didn't have the intelligence. We didn't have the data, and we didn't know how to use it. Today, we have the data, so we are compelled to use it, to provide strategic intelligence for strategic transformation. So hence, what we are doing with this center, we're shifting the dial from Industry 4.0 into Society 4.0 domain. That is difficult. But what is important is that Swinburne and Amazon have committed to that journey via the Cloud Innovation Center at Swinburne. Our mission is to transform industries, shape lives and communities. We were established by entrepreneurs. We were established by industry leaders, and we're true to that task. We also like to say that our institution is not defined by who we exclude, but rather by who we include. Also in our DNA is innovation. That's why back in 2012, we actually partnered with Seek and Paul's outfit, and today we become the largest online education institution in the tertiary sector. That's why we partnered with Siemens and established the first 150 million Industry 4.0 facility in Australia. And that's why we've partnered with Amazon to introduce the first cloud innovation center in the Southern Hemisphere focused on data for social good. We are also disrupting our own organization, realizing that universities of the future cannot deliver outcomes for the future while committing to business as usual, being organized in the same way and operating in the same way. And digitalization is an answer also to enabling us to disrupt ourselves and become an innovative enterprise. Our strategy is about research with impact, future-ready learners, and innovative enterprise. Innovative enterprise is actually not the third pillar. It is the integrating medium that puts it all together via digitalization that breaks the boundaries, enables research to fuel education, enables research and education to be fueled by our operational side, whereby the whole of institution is able to create a common data lake where we all use the same data to seek our respective insights and drive our enterprise to be more successful. Part of this strategic development is also connecting globally. Hence, the development of the Cloud Innovation Center with Amazon allows us also to connect with the global centers where we also have presence. Furthermore, the Cloud Innovation Center with Amazon is building on our institute structure, 5 institutes that we have established outside of all faculties, all departments, all boundaries that work at university level across all departments and faculties, building teams, interdisciplinary, and everything they do by design must involve industry, business, community organization, must create outcomes that drive economic and social impact. That's why the center is based on that platform, focusing on health, especially around personalized healthcare and personalized support based on data, on social innovation, where we are working with government and community organizations to better prepare them for Industry 4.0 and Society 4.0 challenges, for the workforce of the future, for the jobs of the future, for human services of the future, and so on. And that's why we're also looking at smart cities domain and the digital inclusion of citizens in a citizen-centric city where citizens are able to contribute to design and decision-making of their neighborhoods, cities, and regions based on data. And finally, we've positioned the center within the Swinburne Innovation Precinct we've launched last year, alongside with our startup, the Data Experience startup, which facilitates engagement of students across the entire continuum, from vocational education to PhD research, across the entire university, building teams to tackle challenges coming from industry. This is about co-creation, working together with industry to scope challenges, to define solutions, to design outcomes, and deliver in real life. This is also a model of developing the workforce of the future, whereby co-creating those learning experiences with industry allows us to build experiences in our educational program that will equip our students with real-life skills across the entire continuum of education and training, including PhD research. This is a novel concept that we are committed to scaling up across the entire continuum. The center has that role of allowing us and enabling us to scale up. And by being embedded in the innovation precinct, what we are also able to do is support these students and staff to actually engage in our pre-accelerator program, incubator program, and for us to guide them into the commercial venture, where they're able to create their startups, they're able to commercialize their products and solutions, or are able to take it further with their industry partners. And we provide that coaching and mentoring within the precinct. Finally, I would like to invite all of you to send us your challenges and engage with our staff at the booth outside there in the lobby and have a conversation of how you can work with the new Cloud Innovation Center. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Miriam to join me on the stand.
Thank you, Alex. My name's Miriam McLemore, and I am an enterprise strategist with AWS, but prior to joining AWS, I spent 26 years at the Coca-Cola company and retired as the corporate CIO of the company. And I want to share with you today a little bit of a story of Coke's digital transformation journey. So, in my role as CIO, I had all the traditional back office things that you would expect as an IT leader, but I also had all consumer-facing properties of the Coca-Cola system. So all 600 brand websites, everything mobile, and our big properties like the Olympics, the World Cup, and the Super Bowl. And that's actually where my story begins. Back in 2013, we were running what we thought was a very cool promotion for the Super Bowl. It was a mobile and web game that was a race, and consumers could select the ending of the race. And we thought this was pretty cool. It was called an adventure. And so you had 3 different teams, a lot of very expensive ads supporting this mobile game. And so as an IT organization, we took marketing's estimate of the projected consumer uptake on this event and 10x'd it, because this is the Super Bowl, and we do not want to have a capacity issue. Well, I don't know if you would recall, but in 2013, the Super Bowl was played in the New Orleans Superdome. There was a power outage in the Superdome. That was not on my project plan. And so, unfortunately, the consumers at home no longer had a game to watch. The consumers in the stadium no longer had a game to watch. And so more consumers than we anticipated got onto our experience, which was great for the marketing team, but horrible if you're the technology leader for those marketing assets, because we did not scale. People were getting dropped off the experience. They could not complete the experience. They couldn't cast their vote for a team. It was not a good thing. I'm on escalation calls during the game. It was not pretty at all. And meanwhile, just to add salt to the wound, Oreo's agency puts out an ad during the outage, during the blackout, that you can still dunk in the dark. I go in, Super Bowls happen on a Sunday, I go into the marketing team on Monday and say, okay, I'm done. I am done having IT be a barrier to the innovation that we want to drive as an organization. We are moving to cloud. I am done guessing at your capacity needs. I'm done allocating the cost of infrastructure based on sales data that no one was ever happy about. We're done. And fortunately, and as Ed said earlier, I was able to get an executive sponsor and our chief marketing officer to go down that path with us. And that was critical. The chief marketing officer at the Coca-Cola Company is a pretty powerful position. And having him get on stage with IT and talk about driving agility and innovation was critical. And so our message for the business was we needed to transform to create that agility, speed, and innovation. That was our bold statement. Now, internal to IT, we had a lot of work to do to get ready to deliver against that statement. We had to get to a place where we were focused on what differentiated the Coca-Cola Company and what drove value. So that meant going through a full application portfolio rationalization, investing in training and upskilling our resources so they could operate in a cloud environment, and getting the right technology partners in place. AWS, of course, being one of those. Makes sense now why I'm here. And having that be a partnership, not a vendor relationship, because we had to move quickly. Coca-Cola, of course, operates in 209 countries. We heard from Qantas earlier today, and I love the title of their session, Never Too Old to Innovate. Qantas is going to celebrate 100 years this year. Coca-Cola next week will celebrate 133 years in business. That is an organization with a lot of legacy, a lot of tradition, a lot of scale, and it can be challenging to move. So getting really focused as an organization was critical. So what did we do? We started with our digital properties. I picked up all 600 brand websites that I was responsible for and moved them to AWS. Now, granted, that's an easier place to begin because they're not deeply tied into our legacy platforms. So it got us into the cloud, helped us begin our reskilling. We were able to leverage the security tech of AWS. Prior to that, we were actually writing our own security software in Atlanta, Georgia. That's not a good approach. If anybody's doing that, it's not sustainable. And so getting our executive leadership team clear that our cloud providers were going to have better technology for security and create a better environment for us was critical. And again, the chief marketing officer was key to that journey. We also established what we called freedom within a framework to the business. That, for IT terms, is microservices architecture, so that there were certain services the business didn't have a choice, like one obviously running on the AWS platform. We didn't give them a choice, but they had freedom within this framework to do the innovative things around promotions and content that made a difference to their markets and changed the consumer experience. And I also mentioned getting that cost transparency so the markets were paying for what they used versus me allocating based on sales data. No one was ever happy because I got a black box charge from IT that they couldn't impact. Obviously, there are obstacles, and many of these obstacles I imagine you might have in your business as well. We had markets that were working with local agencies, and those were very close relationships and was very difficult way back from Atlanta, especially when you're talking about this part of the world, to get in between those. Often our marketers came to us from these agencies, and they'd turn around and sell business right back to the folks that they used to work with. And so that was a challenge at the time. Back in 2013, technology integrators were not great, that the marketing agencies were farming out technology too, so a lot of holes. And so Coke was getting hacked routinely, and that was distracting my team to address those issues versus building new capability. Certainly, there was a lack of trust in global IT. Can global IT actually deliver? Maybe you've heard that statement before. And then the IT governance was very slow and cumbersome. We heard earlier today about getting to yes. We had lots and lots and lots of people who could say no. Very few who could say yes. So we went through each of these obstacles and created a strategy and approach to addressing the obstacles. We created an agency onboarding process to explain to them our model for freedom within a framework. We down-selected the regional technology integrators to a set that in the various markets all over the world, the business units were comfortable with, but we as a global IT organization were also comfortable with. We built out a microservices architecture that allowed us to constrain services like login and registration, which obviously has PII implications. So we wanted certain controls. And we built out a global content management platform. Coke spends about $1 billion a year in content development. So if you can get some reuse of that content, you've got an ROI. And security. As I already mentioned, when you operate in 209 countries with the breadth of marketing people, and we were just starting here with marketing, right? Then we moved on to the other functions. It was critical to have security as a top priority and get our executive leadership team to understand that. Later, I moved us out of an SAP on-prem HR system to Workday, so HR data in the cloud, running on AWS again, was another big step for the leadership team, just a mindset change, because we were back in 2014 doing this work, and that was still new for a large enterprise like Coca-Cola to be moving to the cloud. So where did we land? Digital became the poster child for agility. And so after we did this with marketing, I had finance and legal and HR coming to us saying, how do we get what they got? Which was a great position to be in. We built trust between marketing and IT. And then we had a seat at the table to the book that my colleague Mark has written. So we were part of the development process with marketing. We built out our strategic partnership with AWS and have been able to influence some of the developments at AWS, so that was great. And we moved, after the digital properties, into data analytics in the cloud. So that was another journey for the business about data in the cloud and how does that work and what is the value that we gain there. Finally, as part of this part of the journey, we sold and closed our North America data center, being the largest data center. Coke is now out of all data centers as of last spring. So completely cloud, which is a huge step for an enterprise the size, scale, and age of the Coca-Cola system. And just in closing, for me, it wasn't one thing that won the day. I 100% agree with Ed, you've got to take a bold step. I happened to leverage a burning platform, which was the Super Bowl. But taking a bold step or leveraging an issue or an event. But at the end of the day, the thing that won was continuous small wins and maintaining momentum, getting things done and then repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, and getting people comfortable that that was the way we now worked. So thank you very much for letting me share a little bit about Coca-Cola's journey with you, and I want to invite Paul back on stage.
Thanks, Miriam. Thank you, Miriam. Conscious that we've run over, so we'll wrap up fairly quickly. But there you have it, 5 very different perspectives. I think what you've seen, though, is there's some common threads that run through all of those perspectives. Now, each of you is going to have your own narrative around building a future-ready business. Our hope is that in the last 70 minutes and now through the next 2 days, what we've done is given you some ideas and some insights that you can layer into your own narratives and take back to your own businesses and move that path forward. And we just hope that we can play a role in supporting you to get there. As I said at the beginning, thank you so much for making the time. We really hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you very much.